Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the NTI PodTalk. My name is Dianne. I'm the Director of Nutrition Therapy Institute. Today, we're talking to a special guest, Kate Kavanaugh, who is founder and owner of Western Daughters Butcher, which is a very unique and special butcher here in the Denver metro area. And I'm going to let Kate talk more about her about the butcher, about why she started it. And so, you know, this pod talk, the reason why we do this is because we want to talk to people who are in the NTI community, around the NTI community. We like to talk about food. We like to talk about, cooking and those kinds of things. And Kate is not only founder and owner of Western Daughters Butcher, but she also is a student at NTI. And so she's marrying these two things together, this interest in a particular aspect of food as well as nutrition. And so I hope that we get to talk about that subject as well. So thank you so much, Kate, for being here. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Dianne, it's such a pleasure to be here. I'm so excited to get to interface with the NTI community. I know that I've seen so many of you over the counter at the shop, and so I hope that this is just a new format to get to know me.
Yep, absolutely. Well, so I mentioned that Western Daughters is a butcher and very unique. And so I would love it if you could tell us what is your butcher? What was your vision? Why did you start it? When did you start it? Kind of give us a little history about that.
So I started Western Daughters in 2013 with my partner, my husband, and I had been a vegetarian for most of my life, and I had come to eating meat for health reasons. And I had seen so much vitality and health come forward when I began eating meat again that I really did a deep dive into the meat industry. And I became really interested in where meat came from. I was really committed to this idea that if I was going to eat meat, I wanted it to be good for the land, good for the animal, and good for the farmer. And so I started visiting farms and ranches and sort of getting into this industry. And once I started, I couldn't stop. And that idea of good for the land, good for the animal, and good for the farmer eventually became sort of the mission statement for Western Daughters. And my experience was that there was this really interesting space, especially being from Colorado, where I was interested in how meat could be a byproduct of conservation and of grasslands conservation in particular. And so here you have this beautiful coevolution of ruminants. And I think we see this more as bison here in North America and the grasslands, and that they really had this symbiotic relationship where these grasses are taking carbon from the atmosphere. And at the time of the plains being at their largest, they comprised about 40% of the United States. During that time, they estimated that they would sequester more carbon than modern rainforests. And so here you have this powerhouse of an ecosystem, and it's maintained in conjunction with ruminants. And so you have tens of millions of bison and elk and pronghorn that are roaming the plains. When we fast forward to modern day, we really see this emptying out of the prairie, and it's used a lot more to some extent in the Midwest for grain crops. And those grain crops largely feed animals that originally were only meant from a biological evolutionary perspective as ruminants to digest grass. And so the question was, how do we support this ecosystem where meat is the byproduct and farmers that are practicing regenerative agriculture, which is mimicking those systems that formed the grasslands and the ruminants together? And how do we take that and help create some consistency and financial sustainability for farmers? And so that's when Western Daughters Butcher Shop was born in 2013. And we sell only 100% grass-fed and grass-finished beef and lamb, and pasture-raised pork and chicken. No antibiotics, no hormones. We ensure that there's no herbicide or pesticide or chemical prophylactic use on any of our farmers' lands, and there hasn't been for well over a decade. Everything is done beyond organic, though certification isn't always something that our farmers can manage. And everybody is working within a regenerative model and trying to get their farm to the most regenerative place possible.
That's great. I love that mission. I think that I wish everybody had these values and expectations about their meats that they, consume and purchase. So I love that. So I would imagine maybe it is becoming more of a popular way to think about raising animals and farming the regenerative process. But is there a challenge in finding suppliers to provide meats for your butcher shop?
Yes and no. And here's what I'll say. Our farmers, we have been in a really unique position where we have evolved and grown with our farmers. And so many of the people that were on board with Western Daughters day one, and it was hard to find farmers in 2013 that were willing to commit to this sort of strange model and to, young people starting a butcher shop, but they have grown and evolved with us, and their farming and ranching practices have also grown and evolved as we have been able to provide more financial sustainability for them. On the other hand, as my partner and I own a farm ourselves, and we're really interested in doing things sort of radically different from even within the regenerative model, for finding a new way of raising poultry and raising pigs where there's low amounts of polyunsaturated fatty acids in the feed sources. And so and doing pasture raised poultry on a whole different level. So it has been hard to find people that, if there's good, better, best, and then just beyond, we're still working on kind of getting that beyond space into Western Daughters. And we're so hopeful that by doing some of this ourselves, we're better able to work with farmers to implement it in different places across the country.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that you're looking at ways to get low PUFA meats. Can you talk about why that's important for those of our listeners who may not understand why that's important? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So polyunsaturated fatty acids, and the main type that we're talking about here is linoleic acid, are highly concentrated in mostly we see it as humans in industrial seed oils. So things like canola oil or sunflower oil, safflower oil, grapeseed oil, a really high amount of linoleic acid in the form of polyunsaturated fatty acids. And these are omega-6 fatty acids, and they cause inflammation in the body. And I'm sure that you could speak to this a little bit better. We'll keep it short.
Yeah.
And in general, we're aiming to get a 1-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3s in the human diet. And a big part of this interaction is the composition of the phospholipid bilayer of the cell and that cell membrane. So we want some omega-6s in there because they're adding that fluidity to the cell membrane that we so need. But today, instead of being at a 1-to-1 or even a 2-to-1, we're looking at a 17 to 18-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3s. And the cascade of inflammation that is happening from that space is really concerning. And I think that what we see in terms of leaky gut and autoimmune disorders, and even there's been a lot of studies about polyunsaturated fatty acids and their role in insulin resistance, that this is a growing concern. And when you look at some of the studies that have taken tissue samples, we generally see about a 7 to 8% concentration in PUFAs in human tissue in the 1960s. And in 30 years, by the 90s, that number had doubled. And my guess is that if a study were done now, would be looking somewhere around 30% concentration. So we're actually changing this cell membrane, which is really the source of life, right? That this is the space where everything is exchanged on a cellular level, and the amount of change that is happening there, I think, is pretty profound. So we see these in seed oils, but I think one of the bigger concerns and one of the hidden sources of polyunsaturated fatty acids is actually in animals that are fed corn and soy and rapeseed, which is the precursor to canola oil, in their feed. And this is most animals, even in pasture-based systems. And as a butcher, I can't highlight this enough. Even in pasture-based systems, most people are feeding corn and soy as the supplemental feed source. And what happens here is that even though corn has a relatively low PUFA content, these sort of bioaccumulate inside of the animal. And so where you see, I think corn has about a 5% PUFA content. If animals are fed corn and soy consistently throughout their short lives for livestock, we're seeing it bioaccumulate to represent 30 to 40% in the fat content of pigs and chickens, which puts it about like eating soybean oil. And so here we have this meat that I think a lot of us are using as a source of nutrient density and of vitality and of health. And it's actually accumulated something we really don't want.
Mm-hmm. That was a fabulous review. Thank you very much. You did great.
Great.
And that like hit the nail on the head. That is exactly what I think people don't recognize, is that they may be putting intention into avoiding those PUFAs in, you know, corn oil. They're not using these seed oils in their cooking. They're reading ingredient labels for the presence of these oils, but they don't recognize that they're really high in some of the animal foods that they're consuming. So I appreciate you covering that and bringing it to light and making it a priority in, you know, changing the way we farm and, you know, being one of the trailblazers in doing that. So I appreciate that. Well, okay, so you just did a really great job explaining the whole nutritional aspect. And so let's use that as a segue to talk about, why did you want to get an education in holistic nutrition? I mean, you're clearly doing a really good job using your education to be able to explain that. So why did you want to get this education in holistic nutrition?
I think as a butcher, I had a really unique perspective where I got to see the lifespan and the health span in many ways of animals from the inside out. I got to see how carcass composition changes with all of these different farming practices. And when we opened up the shop, a lot of people started coming in order to improve their health. They were looking for bone broth, or they were looking for organ meats. And as a stressed out business owner, my own health started to decline. And so I started putting some of these things together. And at the same time, I was really beginning to look at a lot of parallels in industrial farming and, I mean, for lack of a better word, the medical industrial complex of human health, and getting to see all of these really unique parallels. And I think we see this very much in the conversation around polyunsaturated fatty acids. We also see it when we talk about fattening pigs using skim milk, which is essentially sugar. And we see this rise in obesity and the use of refined sugars in human health. And I started to kind of put some of these together and become really interested in the bridge between them. Another one that I really like to think about is, I think about soil as Earth's microbiome. Kind of similar situation, right? And you have 1 billion microbes and bacteria and all of these things in a single teaspoon of soil, which I think is just wild and amazing. And then you think about the amount of bacteria and viruses and fungi that are in the human microbiome, and that, you know, they outnumber human DNA logarithmically, almost tenfold at some estimates. And I was really interested in how these two things were kind of on parallel tracks. And I think it's important to zoom back here and say that I think that at the beginning of agriculture, 10,000 years ago, we really had this break as humans where we began to view ourselves as separate from nature. We had this opportunity to suddenly, and I'm going to put this in quotes, be in control of nature through the process of domestication and farming. And I think that when the Green Revolution and industrial agriculture really came online in the 50s and 60s, that break, that idea that we are separate from nature became even more pronounced and even more profound. And watching the analogs between land health through regenerative agriculture and human health as it has drastically changed over the last 100 years, I really wanted to have the knowledge to bridge these two things together. How can we talk about these tracks of land health and human health and how they're not only parallel, but the same, and what an amazing mirror it is. And hopefully through all of that, bring people back to the idea that they are not just connected to nature, but a part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I love that. That is that it's profound to think about those things. So I appreciate that you can speak so articulately about that. So you decided you need to go to school. What made you choose NTI?
So I chose NTI because y'all have a really similar approach to how I had begun to think about diet from an evolutionary sense. And we think about this at Western Daughters with all of our animals, right? Our ruminants, like cattle and sheep, are 100% grass-fed and finished because that is the diet that they evolved eating. And so when I was looking at nutrition programs, what I really wanted for myself was what I believe humans to find a really vibrant state of health is to get back closer to their evolutionary diet. And so NTI really fit that bill for me.
Great, great. Well, we're happy that you did choose NTI. So thank you. So you had started the butcher shop before you started going to school, right? I just want to make sure I have that timing right. Yeah.
Yes, okay. That's correct.
Yeah. Well, so you probably are already sort of marrying these two things together, your education and the knowledge that you're getting in your education with your business and your goals for your business. Do you have, can you talk about how that's coming together, and do you have intentions of doing other things that are marrying these two things together?
I do, and I think it's a process that's currently experiencing some evolution. We have the butcher shop, and then we also have the farm, and this education has given me a really great chance to draw a lot of parallels and to see a lot of trends and just sort of patterns in all of this. And I really want to step back now and create space to, number one, talk about this and to use this as an educational platform. And so I'm actually starting a podcast as well. And we're working with a group of farmers to get some articles together and to really help people better understand what goes into the food system at a farming level and what that means on the basis of nutrition for land and for bodies, and just kind of that intersection point. And so Groundwork is the name of my next project, and it'll be podcasts and work on educating about the intersection of mind, body, and soil, very much what we've talked about here. And then in addition to that, one of the greatest joys that we've had at Western Daughters is better connecting people to their food system and to their farmers. And I think through that process back to nature. And we want to take that on a national scale and help people better find exactly what they're looking for from farmers. And so we have built and are about to launch a big database of farmers with regenerative practices, and it has a massive set of filters so you can find farmers near you with the practices that matter, whether that's low PUFA or managed grazing, or if it's certifications like Savory's ecological outcome verification. We want people to be able to find farms that really match their value system and to be able to access that local community and by proxy, that local ecosystem. And so that's really what's next. And I think that there will be a lot of discussion about some of these mirrors and analogs between land health and human health.
Mm-hmm. So this is fascinating. So let me just make sure I understand. With Western Daughters, you're creating this database. And so will people be able to find it by going to Western Daughters? No. Okay.
So this is outside of Western Daughters. So
Okay.
what we are continuing our work with Western Daughters. This is a whole new venture. It's called Groundwork, and you'll be able to find it at groundworkcollective.com.
Nice. Wow. Well, that's great, because I get a lot of people asking me, how do I find good quality meats? And I'm like directing them to specific farms, and that's good. But if someone's not local or they don't have farms in their local area that I know about, having a reliable database is so important, because there are databases out there, but they don't have a lot of choices for filters. And so I think that's amazing, that you can really tailor your search to be very targeted for exactly what you're looking for. So that's amazing. I'm gonna be on your database. I love it. Thank you. That's great. All right. Well, this has been a fabulous conversation. Really interesting. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about?
I don't think so. I think that getting to share the message around Groundwork and our new work there and what we get to do at Western Daughters, and hopefully helping people connect back into our food system. And I think that if I had one thing to say, it's really find a farmer and start asking them questions, and go to the farm, visit them, get to see what it means to raise food in a setting, whether that's vegetables or meat. It doesn't matter. I think that the more connected we are, and the more we work to bridge the disconnect when we walk into a grocery store and we see a pork chop packaged and it's totally disembodied from everything that it came from. I think that we get a chance to look into a window of not only where our food comes from, and I think that this is a really intimate conversation that we have with our biology on a daily basis, right? Every time we lift a fork to our mouth, this is changing our epigenetics. It's informing our body of our environment. But I think that when you go to a farm and you work with a farmer or a rancher and you become close to your food, you also get a window into who you are and the role that you play within a greater ecosystem. And I think that that's a really powerful thing. So I think that that's the last bit that I'll say.
Yeah, well, thank you. I want to come back to what you were talking about. There is a saying, and there's bumper stickers. It says, "Know your farmer, know your food." And people hear that, it kind of flows off the tongue really easily. But I don't think people really understand what that means and what it takes to know your farmer. Like, you really have to talk to them, go to their farm. If you meet them at a farmer's market, ask them all kinds of questions, because number one, you will then actually understand and know, have confidence in the quality of food that you are purchasing. But also, if they don't have an answer for you, well, I don't know, like, what do you do to ensure the variety of microorganisms in your soil or whatever? If they don't have an answer for it, it's a way that we as consumers generate demand so that farmers know that these are things they need to be thinking about so that they can meet the demand, this new demand that more enlightened consumers have for improvements in quality of their food, whether it be plant foods or animal foods. So I take that very seriously myself as a consumer, but also when I talk to students and when I talk to others about how to seek good quality food.
I think too, I agree so much. And I think it's so important to have that conversation and to recognize that even just by asking your farmer some of these questions, you're informing the way that they might raise food in the future. And I think that the local food system is very much an ecosystem unto itself. And there is a symbiotic relationship there between you and your farmer, where you asking about low PUFA might elicit a change in their practices down the road. And so we have to ask these questions, but I think we also have to see what it means to farm and to better understand what goes into that. Pricing is certainly one of those things. Like, why is this so expensive? And I think that you get a unique chance to see that. And your dollar is a part of that ecosystem. It's a part of what supports a very, very small margin business of farming. And so the more communication and the more of a relationship that I think we can build amongst one another, I think it's a really powerful thing for our food system.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also really like, I resonate with what you said, that when you start this path of learning more about your food, talking to your farmers, developing a personal relationship and interaction with your farmers, you learn more about yourself. I think that's so important. Not that this is all about me, but it really brings up my very first memory when I made my first purchase of meat from a local farmer after being vegetarian for 12 years. And I was at a farmer's market, and I had been told, or I knew that I needed to talk to these farmers and ask questions. I didn't really exactly know what questions to ask, but I just started asking questions. And I still remember this very clearly. I was talking to a woman, she and her husband raised buffalo here in Colorado. And, I was really interested in finding out their priorities and their goals about the slaughtering process. And she told me that every time they send an animal to be processed, to be, euthanized and processed, she kissed it on the nose. And it just brought tears to my eyes when she said that. And I learned so much about myself in that, and I certainly bought meat from her because that was very important to me. So sorry, listeners.
Don't be. I think, as a butcher, I've had so many of these interactions, and as somebody who harvests animals on my own farm, I think that this connection to life is that connection back to ourselves. And I think that story for me that you just told is so impactful. And I think one of the things that it reminds me of is that so much of our neurocircuitry and so much of our biology was wired as we looked for food and as we looked for that connection to our food as hunter-gatherers. I mean, this would have composed most of our time throughout human evolution. And I think that the reason that memory is so powerful, number one, because what a beautiful practice for that rancher to take. And I feel the same way about our pigs and our chickens and our geese that we process. And we always thank them and hold them through that passage between worlds. And I think that it's profound because we are meant to be connected to our food, and we have never in human history, in let's call it 180,000 years of human evolution, been disconnected. And so these memories form so powerfully, probably through our dopamine system, because we're meant to be in connection with this thing. And I think so much, I know that this journey from being a vegetarian to being a butcher to being a farmer to looking at human nutrition, so much of this process has been about filling an unnameable void in myself that I now think I can name a connection to food.
Amazing. Well, that's a great ending point. Thank you so much. That was amazing. So lastly, I just would like it if you could tell people where to find out more about you, Western Daughters, as well as your new adventures, all of your handles, your online stuff, wherever they can find you.
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram at Kate, Kate _ Kavanaugh, Kavanaughh. You can find Western Daughters at Western Daughters on Instagram or westerndaughters.com. And our new venture, Groundwork Collective, you can find at groundworkcollective.com and the handle at Groundwork Collective on Instagram. I'm not much for any of the other social media platforms.
Yeah, great. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Kate. This has been a pleasure talking to you. I really, truly appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to talk to us. It was a really great conversation. So thank you.
Diane, it was my pleasure. It's been a real joy to connect, and thank you for that vulnerable share too.
Yeah. Yeah. All righty.